Everybody knows he's a liar.
But you
I just
agree.
want to make sure.
Joe, you're the liar.
I want to make sure.
Graduated last in your class, not first in your class.
God.
When inflation gets out of control, interest rates go up,
Rishi
that's what
Sunak,
happens.
please let Liz Truss answer.
Excuse me, Chris, I'm speaking, and I'm not done yet.
I haven't heard a time when you aren't
and we're going to be
speaking.
done.
Welcome everybody to this evening's Antidebate. Let me say a little bit at the beginning before we start about why we're doing it and what it's about. Debate has its place. Debate can be beautiful, edifying. It's often a spectacle, a clash, entertaining. It's often very enlivening if it's done well. It can even be informative. But sadly, the way the world is today, there's many structural incentives towards polarization built into the way we get our information. So we're in a phase of history where divergence and bifurcation and disagreement is actually being compounded and exacerbated by the systems and structures that prevail. And this is a big deal because democracies, or even any functioning form of government that includes people, relies on a capacity to discuss adequately what's going on. So I first encountered the idea of the anti-debate when I read a post by Peter Limburg on the Emerge site, whatisemerging.com. And that was a relatively political version of the anti-debate. It was particularly framed with regard to recent debates that were happening in the US. And he was saying, wouldn't it be great if we had something, a different kind of practice that was, if anything, the exact opposite of all the things that are going wrong with debate. Just look at it as a form. It's typically two people. Historically, they would be male. Today, they may not be. And there would be an audience watching these two people flesh something out. And very often, there would be a contention or a proposition. And that gives rise to a contest. One side has one view, one side has the other view. You mobilize the arguments to support your view. You find the counter-arguments to your opponent's view. And of course, there's a great illustrious history to debate. So when debates are done well, it can be really rather a beautiful thing. But there are so many things militating against doing it well. The very architecture of social media is built upon maximizing polarization. But paradoxically, the way it does that is it unites people in what they're against. People are looking for that sense of contest, even conquest, even humiliation.
Watch for his left hook.
So we want debate to be sort of there as a reference point to ground people in what this is. It's a kind of public exploration of any given subject. But it's anti in the sense of antidote. It's trying to actually get beyond all the things that we see as being wrong with debate.
I was involved with the anti-debate from almost the very beginning. My involvement really stemmed from my own long-term question about where is the voice of the people? You know, we're living in a socioeconomic political system that really only gives voice to the people once every 5 years, and then it only requires them to vote in a choice between two parties. What I've always been interested in is this idea that every human being plays a part in a really colourful and rich tapestry of voices that could add up to something that would respond holistically to the problems that we are facing today.
What I've just realised is that all my decisions on this are made by my feelings.
We live in a time where we're all exposed to things that we struggle to make sense of, moments where we can't quite agree with ourselves. Our values don't always align with our actions. Our ideas don't always chime with our values. And a lot of what the anti-debate's getting at is that internal struggle. It's about finding your own inner center in a relationship. So what are we trying to achieve at the end of it? It's not some beautiful middle position which everyone can agree on. It's not some consensus verdict. It's a deeper felt sense of your relationship to the issue at hand.
The anti-debate is a process where you can bring much more of who you are as a human being. You know, your emotional self, what is important to you spiritually, what you value deeply, and bring that into a conversation about things that really matter and about issues where there can be contention, where there can be disagreement and dissonance, and to try and hold that gracefully in the service of a collective wisdom feels like something we deeply need.
As we go through the process, we are experimenting. And so while we have a methodology, and we've done this before, we're ready for surprises, and we're quite happy for you to help us co-create this. I feel that for me personally, the Antidebate has really come alive since Ivo and Indra have helped me with it, because I've realized we've connected it to democracy a bit more closely. This is something about a practice of deep democracy if it's done well.
I have been a designer, I have been a participant, a guinea pig, you could say, and I've been a host. And I would say it definitely has a lot of potential because it's fun, it's engaging, it's challenging, it's all those things. And because it goes just beyond theory, it goes beyond thought. That's why I think it has such potential, because I don't recall who came up with this quote, but it said, like, it's easier to act your way into a new way of thinking than think yourself into a new way of acting. And I believe that is very, very true.
I think peace, we don't really know that much about peace and whether it's interesting or not, because we don't know much about it. So I would suggest that actually peace is a lot more interesting than violence. It's just that we actually haven't explored it very much.
Action, arguably, is the true transcendent value in the world. So you have to act. You have to put yourself on the line. You have to take steps. You have to, take a stand of what it is and see how other people receive you or don't. And either way, this is a kind of courage to put yourself into a new world.
We managed to put together a funding application with the encouragement, actually, to their credit, of the John Templeton Foundation. When I first met somebody there, I spoke to them about it as an idea. There's this thing called the Antidebate. We don't know what it is yet. We need some time to create it. We've actually no idea what the practice looks like yet. We want to start trying. And we may even take a while to get to public engagement, because until you know what you're doing, there's no point in putting something out there that's just not yet formed. So the first few Antidebate practice sessions were 6 people gathering together, and we'd often practice with 2 people together, choosing an issue we wanted to be somehow contentious. So the early stages were quite interesting in terms of the one-on-one activity was not without its value. We learned something about what it was to inhabit another point of view, but mostly it was slightly underwhelming. It had this feeling of, this is not the call. The Antidebate had its own kind of agenda, its own kind of source energy. Most contexts are not 2 people. Most organizational contexts, most political parties, most communities, any given electoral system, invariably multiple layers of interest. So the evolution of the Antidebate was something about recognizing that the one-on-one conversation, while it still had its place, wasn't necessarily our touchstone. And there might also be something about the way the world is evolving that makes it less and less likely that one-on-one will work. There's something about social media that's changed from being mere consumers of kind of information and knowledge to actually what they sometimes call prosumers. We're actually creating and consuming at the same time. So most people who inhabit an online space will have a political view or a view of any given contentious issue, and they'll also be observing views coming in, and they'll be relating to them in various ways. In that context, watching 2 people thrash it out is not nearly as interesting as a larger plural encounter with lots of different views and where they come from. So we began to think that rather than doing it one-on-one, we needed to set up a process that was a bit more collective, a bit more plural, a bit more collaborative. And it was also very clear to me that the Antidebate was a quintessentially offline activity, because it's much more interested in the role of the body, the role of somatic data, what's happening in your body as part of what's going on in an argument. One innovation we had was tableauing, where you would show in space your view of the question at hand or issue at hand.
Agree? Disagree? But I'm going to ask the room to speak to itself.
Just an observation in myself that I notice that when I move to a position, the first thing I kind of almost unconsciously do is kind of say, who's in my community? Hello, Hilly, it's nice to see you there. just noticing that.
So one of the main ways to move beyond debate was the question. Debate, the question is given to you, and you may or may not like it. There's a power struggle in the very question, and about what should we be talking about here and why. And we felt that needed to be part of the method.
How are you feeling about what you're hearing in relation to your question about is fear ever useful?
It feels related, but it does feel quite separate. Or rather, it feels like there's a pairing or a polarity here.
I'm tired of not seeing women in all of the powerful institutions. I'm tired of women not being acknowledged as voices. I'm tired of old women being made invisible. I'm tired of girls being conditioned to become passive with toys. I'm just tired of so many things.
Is masculinity the problem? Show of hands. Okay, we have a question now. You have completed the first stage of the anti-debate. We didn't know what we were going to talk about 15 minutes ago. Now we do.
And so this would move on to the next phase, is what we sometimes call the question bomb, which is that within any good given question, there would be millions of other questions nested within it. So, for example, one question we had along the way was, is war natural? That's a good example of a question that needs to be disaggregated. What is war? What is natural? How do we decide what is natural? What do we imply when we call something natural? How do we make a distinction between war and conflict? And it's not for one single authority to answer them. It's for the room to know that these questions are alive. And next, we'd often have something about thrashing it out. So we'd say what we feel about this. We were quite early on keen to get to feelings, right? This is a very important part of the anti-debate.
And that felt like I was having something taken away from me. And I don't choose to believe that. It exists, but in an individual sense, I don't choose to give over my power.
It's just not true that human beings are primarily rational creatures, right? Yes, we have reason. Yes, we're capable of great rational prowess when the time comes. But underlying it all, there are these deep feelings of threat perception and anger and fear and maybe resentment and a kind of identity protection going on. These are all baked into any given public conversation. Our job in the anti-debate is to make them a part of it. So we're less subject to them and they become more like an object of inquiry that we can begin to explore together. Sometimes we succeeded, sometimes we failed, but that's what we were trying to do.
Well, it's very short, really. I think this is a human-centered question, and I would like to think that we think beyond the human, and natural refers to the whole of creation.
Okay, one more question relating to this. Thinking and feeling are both the same and different. If you agree with that statement, go here. And if you disagree, you're here. Who loved the move? Who felt great? Now we're getting somewhere. Right.
I was standing in the middle and I didn't feel, I could go to either end of the room and then you say something like that and I'm like, great, that's exactly where I was.
The fact that the emotion has a legitimate place in the anti-debate, for me, that was a big thing. I think this idea that reason and emotion are different parts of cognition and they don't really have a way of working well together, I think is really outmoded. We really have to learn to bring our emotion in the way we deal with people in the right way. This is why these sorts of opportunities to hone your skill, your cognition, can be quite helpful. So for me, I found it quite revelatory. It was a thrilling experience.
Throughout the anti-debate, we were also very keen to keep in mind the critical mass of people who just couldn't give a damn, right? Certain number of people who are like, this is not for me. I don't particularly want to talk about this. They're not going anywhere. They're part of our world, and we need the process to somehow acknowledge them and bring them in when the time's right, because they sort of help us to get in perspective whether what we're doing is really the right thing.
And over here, still, are the people who felt they couldn't get behind these positions. And we'd actually like you now to be another group.
That's why we chose the name in the process to call you the enigmatics. People that we don't actually know really what they think and feel. They know what they think and feel.
I was part of the group in that first anti-debate they called the enigmatics. There was a good 15, 20 of us who were just sort of sitting toward the back of the room, watching this all play out and feeling really just sort of, this disillusioned, disenfranchised, disenchanted with the process, which I thought was really interesting because I think that's really reflective of what happens in society.
These people are always in the room, and they're always in your community, and they're always in the public space. So I'm just going to invite you for a second to hear from the people on this side over here.
Well, kind of standing behind that, but feeling reluctant to move into a new group. For the same reason I don't join a political party, although I vote. Because I'm kind of thinking, where's the empathy? How are we going to shift into empathy where we can sit down with people we really disagree with?
I pulled back from the project because I think that sense of being before what's not known actually takes the development of quite deep relationships between the participants in a debate. And so bringing people together for, an evening or even an afternoon when they don't know each other before, and maybe are coming together because they feel they're on opposite sides, cultivating the sense of trust and not just in each other actually, but faith that being mistaken or being exposed to a wider or alternative viewpoint, that can be good for you. I just felt that we didn't really get to grips with that. We didn't quite know how to bring that about.
I think one of the main challenges has been moving from theory into practice. There are a lot of really good intellectual ideas, concepts, frameworks, but when you move that into live praxis with warm bodies, it's difficult. And there's a different skill set that's required. It's much more important to focus on the relational.
Okay, the anti-debate, where's it going? What's it for? Who's it for? What are we trying to achieve? It always had this feeling. Like throughout it, we were like, what the hell are we doing? We're making this up as we go along. Why does it feel that we have to do this? And yet we don't know what we're doing, right? It's something to do with, you could say, listening to the future at some level, being pulled along by a certain pattern that is implicit and you're trying to make it a little bit more explicit. So the evolution of the anti-debate, at that point we began to feel we were missing a little bit of the initial contest. The binary gives you a kind of oscillating energy between two forces that can be quite compelling when it's done well, right? After a while, we didn't want it to collapse into dialogue, right? So we introduced this innovation, we call it swarming, near the end. And that's where, after you've taken some time with the question, to first of all decide on what you want to share together. And by the way, there's a little voting process for that, where people drop out when they feel the question's not theirs. Then you begin to feel the group physically stands around the question they want to go with. We do that, and then there's a certain amount of time exploring the question, and an engagement with the underlying issues and values in the question, a certain amount of representation of the diversity in the room. Once you've done all that, there's still this issue of, and so what? How can this practice actually in some way focus your mind, actually clarify what's at stake? So what we build up to towards the end is people showing not just their opinion, but their moral and political commitment. And this is called taking a stand.
I stand for virtue cultivation internally and externally.
Effectively what's going on here is you're trying to recruit people. You're trying to attract them.
Embodied resistance is with your body. It's not something outside of you. So it's about the earth reflecting into your body and awakening the inner movement of politics.
Okay, who's moving? Who's moving towards Dominique?
I think it's so interesting that I can't speak about it as if it's a static thing. The words that want to come to me is like organism. Like I don't want to call it a project. I want to find some term for it that speaks to its sort of living essence, because I think that's part of its magic and its potential. And also why it's still frustrating to people, because it's not something that you're necessarily going to come out of with a 12-step action plan.
I'm wondering if anyone here is going to make any difference in their lives or the way they act as a result of this. And depending on the outcome of that, is that what this was designed to do? Or is this process more like maybe a religious experience or maybe a really good psychedelic trip where it kind of works through you over the coming months and years without you really realizing it somewhere deep inside.
It felt really alive as a process. It wasn't just, sometimes these things can be quite sitty-downy, talky, but it felt a lot more, a different energy to that, which I really appreciated. And for me personally, I find myself asking myself some difficult questions, some important questions. I may have left with more questions than I have answers, but in a good way.
We all had different takes on the statement. And just through this very short discussion, we were all able to see each other's points and realize that actually we're quite aligned on this, even though our focus is on different words in the statement. For me, the most important thing about the anti-debate is that it transforms the tempo at which people speak, and also even the kind of personal involvement, let's say. It allows a different register, different levels.
I think there's so much benefit for a group to unearth what's live, and that they want to have a conversation that wasn't predetermined, and just the unearthing of unexpected points of view, and really tuning into where you might resonate with it or disagree. But we can learn from nature to access our better selves as humans. We're stretching a muscle here and expanding our capacities here, which, it's really important. I know this is happening in schools, which is absolutely where it needs to be.
We brought the process into the schools pretty much exactly as we've been running it with adults. And when we did this, prior to this, we have no idea what is going to happen. We don't know how the young people are going to respond. And so it was a real delight to actually find their engagement was so high with it.
You're meant to listen, not speak.
That's an age where developmentally young people are figuring out who they are, what they care about, what they stand for, what they believe, and also making sense of the world. And so the anti-debate is a kind of process where that's really what you're doing. You're getting clarification on what you feel, what you think, what you believe, but you're also experiencing that, exploring that in relationship to what other people's thoughts, values, and opinions are. One of the things that's interesting about the anti-debate, as I understand it, is it's something that many different people have contributed to over its existence. So it's not just got one sole author. Lots of people have kind of given their input. So the anti-debate it's like a mutt, if you like. It's kind of this lovable rogue, right? And so my hope for the anti-debate is that actually continues. My hope is that we can find a way to release it into the world, and that more and more people can start to iterate upon it and play with it and bring their innovations to it.
The anti-debate as a piece of social software, if you like, would be very useful if it was simply available to communities to pick up, to learn the mechanics of, and to use for themselves, set their own agenda, set their own tone, set their own pace.
I think some of the people, and even my first impression of it, was perhaps like, this is hubris. This is hubris to try and attempt to devise a new form of civic dialoguing, of relating, of coming into conversation about the world and reality. And it is hubristic, it is audacious, and yet it's worth trying. It's worth trying.
I do believe that creating new social practices that are worthy of the challenges of our times is a big part of the work. It's not enough to theorize. It's not enough to persuade. You actually have to practice in a way that speaks to and from the challenges that you're writing about, thinking about. It's moving beyond the expectation that a mere idea can change the world. It's the idea enacted socially and culturally that begins to feel more promising.